Welcome back, dear friends, at Lit ECT YouTube channel, where we come with some videos based on great works, writers, critical theory that proves helpful in all exams related with English literature. Dear friends, in our present series, Great Novels of World Literature, we cover some iconic, some very important works from which questions have generally been asked in all the exams. So friends, in today's particular video, we will discuss a landmark work of modernist fiction, that is Sons and Lovers. We all know that it is written by one of the greatest novelists of 20th century, one of the father of, we can say, modernism in novel, and a very influential figure along with Virginia Woolf and James Joyce, that is D.H. Lawrence. If we talk about the genre of this novel, it is a bildungsroman, first published in 1913, and its setting is the northern England, a very we can say in area where the impact of industrialization was very much visible during this period. Dear friends, if we talk about some background information related with this novel, in fact, D.H. Lawrence was deeply affected by his mother's death and based Sons and Lovers on this particular traumatic experience. So we can say in this particular part that the novel has many autobiographical features. Also set in the early decades of the 20th century in an industrial mining community. At this particular time, miners were considered working class people and were generally uneducated and unrefined. So Lawrence has presented the rift in the society between the refined and educated class and this particular manual working class. There is also a direct reference to the growing interest in women's rights with the rise of the suffragettes movement, who protested frequently for the right to vote and a public interest, better labor laws, and better condition for workers. We have characters who are involved in this particular movement. So D.H. Lawrence has tried to put his hand on this throbbing pulse of the time. And when we talk about the autobiographical touches in the novel, Lawrence closely modeled the character of Miriam, one of three major characters of the novel, on his real life friend Jesse Chambers. So these are some background informational fact about the novel. Now we come to the story of the novel. This chart will help you later. You can have it in PDF also on request. It will help you to understand the characters and their particular action route. So we must understood about two main characters, that is Gertrude Morrell. She is one of the major characters, this Gertrude Morrell, and then we have most important character Paul Morrell, or we can say he is the protagonist of the novel. He is in relationship with two women, Miriam and Clara, and basically most of the novel revolve around these four characters. Okay, the novel opens at the Bottoms, which is a housing colony for coal miners and situated at the downside of Bestwood. Now, Bestwood is an area of better, larger, finer houses. Gertrude, coming from a middle class family, she is married to Walter Morrell, who is a miner, and she is now rather disappointed coming at Bottoms from the Bestwood. We can say the Bestwood presents the middle class settled housing, while Bottoms represents the miners' colony. She married Walter when she was just a young girl of 23, inexperienced, driven by passion, and attracted with his boisterousness, liveliness. However, only after a few weeks, she begins to feel restless because of the intellectual inferiority of Walter. After the birth of her first child, William, Gertrude begins to give most of her time on William, and Walter begins to drift away from her. He begins to drink heavily, and there are daily fights between these husband and wife. One day, in his inebriated, drunken state, Walter cuts the blonde hair of William, and Gertrude is angry, shocked, and this basically creates an we can say invincible wall between Gertrude and Walter forever. Walter begins to drink more and more. His earning decreases, and the family has to face tough financial times. Gertrude gives birth to Annie. This is her second child, her daughter, but still her relationship with Walter becomes more and more strained with each passing day. She is now pregnant with her third child, and there is a very important scene when, after a fight, Walter drives her away. She is pregnant, but she is left outside, and she watches. At first, he is quite agitated, thinking about what will happen to her. But when she looks at the moon, which is at the full moon, I must tell you here, dear friends, that full moon is a very important and recurring symbol in D.H. Lawrence novels. She watches the full moon, then she feels a calmness and silently returns to the house. She gives birth to Paul, and now all her dreams and hopes are woven around her three children. The distance between the couple, Gertrude and Walter, increases. Walter also feels that his authority in the house has waned because Gertrude pays attention more and more on William. Paul, when he is growing up, is rather a sickly child, always afraid of his father. Gertrude then gives birth to his another child, another son, Arthur. Gertrude, when Williams is almost coming to age, she insists him to work at a cooperative society as an assistant, because though Walter objects, she doesn't want William to become a minor. William grows up as an ambitious man, mixing with rich men, having many girlfriends. Gertrude doesn't like this particular socializing. Here you can see that William Morrell is a very ambitious kind of person, and he does not respond to his mother's affection. She is very much worried about this particular attribute of William. William finally finds a job and leaves for London. Gertrude is obviously devastated. Once again, she feels that she has been left alone. After William has left, Paul has to take many responsibilities of household works like collecting wages, and he doesn't like these things because he is a budding painter. His passion is observation of nature and then painting. In fact, we come to know that he paints a beautiful picture of his mother also, and Gertrude also encourages this artistic inclination of her son. William writes constantly from London, and he poses that he has getting success, but he never sends any money. Gertrude is also worried that the fashionable London society may seduce her son. After an accident of Walter, Paul also wants to chip in family's income so that he can help his mother. As such, Paul and Gertrude go to Nottingham to meet the owner of an elastic making factory. Paul is very much excited about the trip and thinks of her almost like a sweetheart with whom he is having an adventure. At the factory, Paul gets the job and soon makes friends with his supervisor, Mr. Pappleworth, and there are many girls. Paul is favorite of all because of very decent behavior, and many ladies become his good friend. William in London is engaged to Miss Louisa Weston and spends a great deal of money on her. In fact, he brings her to with him at holidays. But at the same time, we come to know that William is sometimes very much irritated by Louisa's behavior. He even complains to his mother that finds Louisa quite stupid a girl. One day, Paul and Gertrude walk over to Mr. Livers' farm to visit Mrs. Livers, who is Gertrude's friend and a deeply religious woman. Here, they meet their daughter Miriam, who is just a girl of 14 and appears quite haughty to him. She is picking flowers and doesn't pay any attention to Paul. The distance between William and Louisa continues to widen, and Gertrude is worried about William's health. Gertrude is informed of William's sickness. Her worries come true. She goes to London, but soon William dies. After William's funeral, Mrs. Morrell loses all interest in life for some time. Paul gradually comes close to Miriam. He pays many visits to the farm. Miriam loves his painting and also the way he appreciates nature. They have many long walks in the evening in which their conversation makes it clear that Miriam is quite a religious girl like her mother. Gertrude is now worried about the growing intimacy of Paul and Miriam and tells Paul that they both are too young for courtship. When Paul turns 20, the family goes for their first vacation. Miriam is also invited, though she doesn't find herself fit in the company of mother and son. Paul feels physically drawn towards Miriam, but she is hesitant about having physical relationship with him. Paul gets irritated and Gertrude blames Miriam for this change. They basically wrap up their vacation early and come back to their home. Arthur, the youngest son of the family, has grown up into a boisterous young man. He first gets a job but later joins the army and now wants his mother to come and help him unenroll from the army. He wants to return to home. Meanwhile, Paul is now introduced to Clara Dawes, who is friend of Miriam, and he is instantly attracted towards her. Clara's husband Baxter also works at the same company where Paul works, but now Baxter and Clara are separated. From the day one, there are cold vibes between Baxter and Paul. There is an ugly fight between Gertrude and Walter, and Paul becomes worried about his mother's health because Walter hits her. Paul asks Miriam to stop meeting him because Paul knows that his mother is a driving force in his life, making relationship with other women impossible. Now Annie, the daughter, gets married, and when Paul sees her mother sad, he vows if he gets married, his wife will have to accept that he will always put his mother first. Paul is torn between Miriam and Clara. Soon he writes to Miriam that though she means a lot to him, they can't get married. Clara also joins Paul's factory and both start to spend more time together. Clara is a suffragette and despises the male-dominated society. Miriam, on the other hand, is still convinced that Paul will return to her. Paul is troubled by the religious fervor of Miriam, as once he tries to kiss her, but look in her eyes kills all his desire. They finally have their first sexual experience, but Paul feels that Miriam is sacrificing herself for his desires and their relationship once again gets strained. Eventually, Paul ends his relationship with her. Paul now starts spending more time with Clara and both have physical relationship also. He invites Clara for tea and later Miriam also arrives and feels bitter seeing that Clara is warmly accepted while she has always remained unwelcomed by Gertrude. Clara is irritated to find Paul still likes Miriam and she returns without giving in to Paul's desire to have sex with her, which infuriates Paul. Then a few days later, Paul gets a chance to spend a night at Clara's house. He meets her mother and again feels intense urge to have sex with Clara, but Clara seems not interested. So now you can see that how Paul is continuously oscillating between Miriam and Clara. Clara, who is already married, Miriam, who is quite religious, and Paul is not able to find both soul and body involved with these girls. Paul has an altercation with Baxter, and Clara is furious about her name being dragged publicly, and Paul can feel a coldness that has creeped in their relationship. The next spring, Paul and Clara rent a cottage at the seaside and stay there together for some time. One day, while coming back from Clara's home, Paul is ambushed by Baxter. Baxter beats him, leaving him. Baxter leaved him. There are basically fist war between both of them. He leaves Paul bruised. Eventually, Paul drags himself up and limps to his home. He is shocked and pained to know that her mother might be suffering from an incurable cancer. Baxter also fell sick, and when Paul informs Clara about it, she feels guilty. Mrs. Morrell's health, meanwhile, steadily declines. Paul and Clara go on a seaside trip, but Paul is constantly unhappy, concerned about his mother's health. At home, Paul and Annie and some friends try to lift the spirits of Gertrude. She feels a bit relieved, though she is in great pain. As Christmas approaches, Mrs. Morrell grows ever weaker. Finally, not able to bear her pain, Paul gives her an overdose of morphine and she dies next evening. Baxter recovers. Paul and Baxter become good friends. Paul hardly visits Clara now. Clara also thinks Baxter is much better man than Paul and is happy to have him back. Paul now feels lost and takes a room in Nottingham. He no longer cares about painting, doesn't want to get married. He sees Miriam one evening at church, and as he watches her sing, he thinks she looks like a saint. He invites her at his room. Miriam is shocked to see the shabbiness of the place. When she comes to know that Paul is no more seeing Clara, she asks him if he wants to marry her, but he refuses. Then he goes out to drive at night. There is a suicidal urge in him. He calls out for his mother in the dark, wants to join her. However, still determined not to give in, he turns back towards the lights of the town. So dear friends, this was all with our detailed summary of this great autobiographical novel by D.H. Lawrence, which basically presented Oedipal complex. Lawrence always was more interested in what happens inside rather than the outer action, and through the character of Paul, who is basically dominated emotionally by the presence of his mother, suffers a lot in his relationship. Okay friends, we will meet soon with another great novel and its detailed analysis. Keep supporting. Thank you friends.